Yeah, all right. It's one of those where the music just starts right off the bat and there's no cold open, nothing funny at the start. But guess what? It's because we didn't have time for it, all right? We had far too much to say about the fights, which, by the way, were extremely good. Oh, I have to go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Conor Ruebusch. With me, as always, is Dr. Patrick Wyman, and we have some incredible fights to talk to you about this week. That's right, I'm talking about the second UFC bout of CM Punk. Pat, were you as thrilled by this exhibition of mixed martial arts skill as I was?
I thought it was awesome. I cannot wait to see CM Punk go 0-3, 0-4, 0-5, 0-6 in MMA, desperately hunting for somebody that he can beat.
Some sense of validation for... Okay, for real.
Okay, I only have one question about this that I want to get out of the way.
Yeah.
How many people in the crowd of that fight do you think could have beaten CM Punk? So there were 18,000 people there. What is your over-under on number of people in the audience? Because this includes fighters who were there hanging out. It includes people who seriously train, referees.
Okay, let's see. CM Punk is...
McMaynard.
He's billed at 6'2". That is laughable. What's his actual height?
Probably.
Like 5'10"?
5'11", maybe.
Okay, so he's about average height. So I'm going to go ahead and say, like, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, say 40% of the audience. 40% of the audience is taller than him. So all of them.
I would guess, really and honestly, that there were probably 200 people in the audience who could have beaten CM Punk in a fight.
Yeah, no, honestly, that's probably true. Anyone who's a really experienced street or bar fighter could have really hung in there with him. No joke.
That's leaving aside like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belts who just train regularly and are hanging out in the audience.
True. Not that this is the CM Punk show. I did want to touch on it first because I had a few people asking about my comments during last week's episode's intro, in which I said the only two fights not worth watching on this card were conveniently right next to each other. And no, I was not talking about Jackson versus Punk, which I thought was perfectly worth watching and very funny. And also a little depressing, but complex emotions were derived from that contest, and I don't regret having watched it. I was talking about De La Rocha versus Coulter and Smith versus Evans, and one of those turned out to be an incredible barn burner. So, I don't know. Pretty much this whole card was spectacular, and that does include the second performance of CM Punk's UFC career. It was, frankly, it could have been stopped in the second round. It was a sustained beating, but it was, I think, for a lot of fans, for the other, 20,000, 10,000, whatever people in the audience who couldn't have beaten CM Punk, a helpful reminder to them of what it actually takes to be a successful MMA fighter. Because Mike the Truth Jackson is not even an established professional, even though he said before this fight, oh, it's a professional versus an amateur. The man only had, 2-3 pro fights before this.
I don't think he had any pro fights. I think he only had amateur fights. I think his first pro fight was the one with Mickey Gall.
Yeah, and he did a little boxing, and he did a little Muay Thai, all amateur as far as I know. And
yeah, he's a lawyer.
Yeah, and a member of the MMA media, so we'll call this a win for ourselves. But seriously, the level of composure Mike Jackson showed, just as someone who has been training for a while, the amount of difference that made between him and a supposedly quality athlete in CM Punk was astounding. So to all of you schmoes in the audience who thought that, the type of people who boo Curtis Blades for scoring a spectacular takedown, Mike Jackson would fuck you up. So this fight was a helpful reminder.
Real badly.
Yeah, a helpful reminder of that fact. Of course.
It's a levels thing, where
levels, yes.
You can have, there are plenty of people who there are way more people in that audience who could have beaten up CM Punk than people who could have beaten up Mike Jackson. Credit to CM Punk for being tough enough to take his beating, I guess.
Yeah. Credit to him and for not quitting. I mean, the man's got heart. He just does not belong in the octagon.
Has no talent. No discernible talent.
That is the truth. He's charismatic, I guess. I've never watched pro wrestling. No. What we're here to talk about, Pat, was one of the best fights I've ever seen. The rest of this card was, I mean, there was quite a lot of worthwhile action delivered here. And quite contrary to the last 3 weeks' events, some really meaningful stuff happened on this card. Fights that seemed like they would have an impact on their respective divisions. But the main event was the middleweight title fight, half of a middleweight title fight, between Robert Whittaker, the defending champion, and Yoel Romero, the illegitimate challenger, due to a 2-ounce weight miss. And there was some business going with the commission. Whatever happened, it was one of the best fights I've ever seen. It was absolutely incredible. We gushed about the first fight between these two men last week, as well as after it happened, and I'm sure we were plenty excited before that one happened too. This one, I think, lived up to and exceeded all of my expectations, and both of these guys were able to push one another to the brink in a way that I didn't think there was any farther they could have pushed one another after their first fight. This is like two guys who are perfectly paired to bring the best out of one another, and they both adapted and tried to one-up their previous performance.
Yeah, this was a fantastic back-and-forth fight that I think showcased what each guy does really well. They showcased both of their smarts, both of their ability to adjust, their toughness, and just frankly how far above every other middleweight on the planet they are. You know, not that Romero is going to be a middleweight again after this, I don't think, but like there is nobody close to either of these two guys. Yeah,
and it's like honestly, it's I don't know. I'm still probably I literally just watched the fight this afternoon, so I'm probably still riding the high of that when I say this. So maybe I'll regret this at some point, but it's hard not to watch a fight like this for me and come away from it thinking like those are two of the best who have ever done this. Mm-hmm. Like those were two all-time great talents, and I'll be thinking about this fight 30 years in the future. I'll be like, man, I was lucky to have seen that. I was lucky to have been around when the build-up for that was happening and getting to discuss it after the fact. It was in the words of Yoel Romero, it was my pleasure to watch that fight.
Yeah, I think it says a very great deal about kind of where we're at in 2017 and 2018 that two guys that good. Like, Romero is legit. If you look at the wins on his record, one of the best middleweights of all time.
Yeah.
The Honorable Robert Knuckles, Esquire, is also among the very best middleweights of all time, resume-wise, by virtue of the guys that he's beaten. Finishing Jacare, going through, beating Yoel Romero twice now.
I mean, and by the way, like, if Robert Whittaker weren't around, Romero might be heading away the top contender for like best middleweight right now. You know what I mean? Like Whittaker's the only guy who's really been able to beat him in this division. The only guy.
Yep.
And Romero's record is insanely stacked.
Yeah, Romero has not had an easy fight in this division probably since his first fight in the UFC.
Yeah,
he
since
beat Clifford Starks.
Yeah, not since I guess you could call Ronnie Marks an easy opponent. Relatively speaking, but it's been Derek Brunson.
But Ronnie Marks was a big-time prospect back in 2013.
Truth, yeah. I mean, yeah, both of these guys, astounding records, and the skills reflect that in holy shit, what a fight. I don't really, as was the case with our preview episode last week, I don't really know where to start talking about the pairing between these two, because it was all so good. It was all so incredible to watch and just kind of left me breathless. Where do you want to kick off with this one?
I want to start by talking about two very different kinds of process.
Okay.
So I think that the first couple of rounds of this fight really brings out both the similarities and the contrasts between the two fighters. So they both started this fight by doing more extreme versions of the things that they normally do. Yeah. Whittaker got out there trying to set the distance by throwing those kicks and by working his jab, by trying to dart in and out of range, by using his footwork to stay off the cage. That he just did all of that kind of extra, more so than he normally would have, in an attempt to force Romero back to a distance where Whittaker could kind of pot shot away at will and score points. Whittaker has finishing ability, but at the end of the day, he's kind of he is most comfortable pot-shotting, counter-punching, and being in control. He is an out-fighter, I think, at heart.
And he'd also be a fool to expect to finish Yoel Romero.
Yes, he was going out there to win rounds on the assumption that he would not be able to finish one of the toughest dudes who's ever put on a pair of gloves.
Yeah, no doubt.
Because Romero is one of the toughest dudes who has ever done this. Just freakishly durable. So that's point number one. Point number two, by contrast, is that Romero is not a point scorer, has no illusions that he's a point scorer, and really only scores points in an effort to set up his kill shots. He just did a more extreme version of that where he essentially didn't throw strikes for the first 3 minutes of this fight and just gauged the distance, let shots bounce off his gloves, kind of half landing, playing with rhythm, playing with feints, trying to understand where is he coming from, what does his footwork look like, what shots might come about as a result of him doing these things. And so I thought the contrast between those two things, between Romero just letting things come to him and trying to figure it out, being willing to give away rounds to collect the information that he's going to need later on to finish the fight, and Whittaker very determinedly scoring point after point after point after point in service of creating the kind of fight he wants. Both guys were maximizing their chances of winning the fight, but they did so in entirely opposite ways.
Which just kind of like illustrates what a perfect style matchup this is. Both guys were extremely themselves, and it resulted in, again, one of the best fights I've seen in this sport.
So I think, to me, the reason why I love this fight so much and why I love both of these two fighters so much is because they showcase the extent to which we have moved past skill sets as fighter archetypes.
Yeah. There's no longer striker, grappler, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's the contrasts that we see between fighters are ones of temperament, style, and focus rather than straight up what skills do they possess. Both these guys know how to throw jabs. Both of them know how to throw straight punches. They know how to throw looping punches. They know how to throw kicks. They know how to throw knees. They know how to wrestle. They know how to grapple. They know how to clinch. There is no gap in any of their skill sets. They know how to do all that. The question is, why do they do what they do? How do they do it? And with what goal in mind?
Mm-hmm. We still think in terms of what kind of fight does this guy like to have, given the choice. But I think we're past the point of thinking that like a top-heavy grappling performance and a pressure striking performance are necessarily different kinds of fight.
Exactly.
That they might both fit into the same kind of mindset. And then certainly a guy's skill set is always going to be distinct and unique from the next guy's. Everyone's going to fight differently, but and it's a great study of how styles work, I think, a fight like this. I do want to touch on, I have to give Romero some shine for this because last week we kind of came away from the discussion like, I feel like we kind of ended up saying, it feels like Whittaker should win this because he just handled the first fight so intelligently and won, the clear 3 rounds. And it's hard. It's just so hard to grasp how Romero's style works because he is preternaturally gifted, both physically and mentally as a fighter. And so it's like, Whittaker feels like he has the stylistic edge, but Romero's dangerous is what it kind of seemed like my closing thoughts were last week. And I just want to give credit to the beautiful simplicity of the major adjustment Romero made for this fight, the one which you already pointed out, which was, okay, normally I get tired after round 3. What if, because I start fighting in round 1, what if I don't start fighting until round 2 and then don't get tired until much later in the fight? It was a gambit, but Romero's whole style is a gambit. It's all about keeping himself. He's like a genius version of Derek Lewis. You know what I mean? He's like next level Derek Lewis, where really it's like keep yourself in the fight so you can land the devastating shot, which will eventually come.
Yeah, it's the difference between a guy like Romero and Lewis is the genius part, right? It's that even when he is not doing things, Romero is still doing things because he is constantly processing information. He's constantly watching what you're doing and how you do it. So when he does something, and this was what I think you and I failed to grasp about his style for so long because it's so hard to see. And what I think the commentators in that fight still didn't fully grasp is that Romero doesn't do shit without a reason. He doesn't take a shit without a reason. Everything Romero does is incredibly purposeful
Yeah.
and based on his understanding, kind of an innate understanding of his percentage chances of it working. So when he's sitting back and letting Whittaker throw strikes at him, that's not because he likes getting hit or because even necessarily he's trying to conserve his gas. The preserving the gas is a nice byproduct of the fact that he is giving himself the information that he needs to land that knockdown shot that he landed in the third round. You know, it's that knockdown shot doesn't come, and Romero understands this, unless he has the information necessary to read the likely reaction to the setup shot.
Yeah.
That is the key thing you have to understand about him, is that Romero's knockdowns and insane finishes and those bursts don't just happen because he decides it's time to do them. They happen because it takes him a while to figure out what he needs to know to make them happen.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of maturing a bit too, because typically when Romero does have a slow start, and this was hardly the first time he started a fight slow. We all remember we all don't remember nothing happening before he ended up finishing Lyoto Machida in the third round, where they essentially did nothing but position themselves against one another for like 12 minutes. But the thing is this is something that Mike Reardon pointed out in his article on Yoel Romero's wrestling career as like a key element of Romero's personality, which is that Romero used to like cross the straps of his singlet because it looked badass. That was like his look as a wrestler. And Coach Mike essentially said, like, I think that says a lot about who Romero is. He really cares about looking badass. Like, he's really conscious of how impressive what he's doing is to the people watching. He's a real spectator's kind of fighter. And typically when he's having a slow start, there's not a lot happening to him. Whereas Whittaker was filling that space. Whittaker was giving Romero things to react to. He was, in a sense, egging him on. If Romero were less disciplined or had a weaker grasp of the sort of the metagame that he's playing, he could have gotten that approach from Whittaker could have drawn him into the same fight he had last time, where he had to muster every ounce of energy he had left in the fifth round in a desperate attempt to finish it after doing nothing for the middle rounds of the fight. But he just took that as an opportunity to read what Whittaker was doing. He was like, okay, he's going to feint me for a while. And speaking of Whittaker being extra himself, feinting is kind of Whittaker's trademark at this point, and he did a lot of excellent feinting and maneuvering in the early portions of this fight. But Romero just kind of ate that information up, and then we talked a little last week about his improved pocket boxing. I think just the fact that Romero almost entirely dedicated his efforts to boxing in this fight was also a brilliant adjustment. He wanted to catch Whittaker in short range with the most efficient strikes he could possibly throw so he would have the best chance of landing a big shot as the fight went on. And he was throwing in combinations so much more than he ever did earlier in his MMA career. Did
you notice him key in on the way that Whittaker was ducking down to avoid counters and then trying to hit that uppercut?
Yes.
As a result of it? Like, you can just see Romero's wheels turning. And what's amazing about Romero to me is that he doesn't immediately try to exploit this hold that you've just shown him. He tries to bait you into showing it to him again.
He lets
so that
you get comfortable with the pattern.
Exactly.
He lets it become like a momentary habit so that you're not thinking about it when he pulls the trigger to counter you.
Yeah. Which is just so – there's such levels to that shit.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that we've ever seen anybody play with you quite that much.
How much patience and foresight it takes to do that in the midst of a fist fight when the other guy's trying to take your damn head off is incredible.
Whereas with Whittaker, we saw much more straightforward adjustments. I thought the head kicks were incredibly sharp because he realized that, like, he could get Romero to go to a particular kind of guard by throwing particular kinds of shots, and then – Whittaker's adjustment to that was to kick around the guard, to pull Romero's hands to a particular place and then try to kick around it, knowing that Romero that the kick wasn't probably going to land flush, but he was going to land half of it, and if he did that over and over again, eventually one of those might crack the uncrackable. But again, that's the dedication to process where he's like, I accept that I'm not going to finish this guy even if I kick him flush in the fucking head. So let's just try to land as many of these good shots as I possibly can to make sure that everybody knows who is winning the fight as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he went too far in that front at any points, Whittaker? Do you think he was a little too boxer puncher, or rather a little too puncher at times, like trying to engage Romero in a fight that he didn't necessarily need to win? Or do you think it was imperative for him to keep that kind of volume on Romero?
I think it was imperative for him to keep that kind of volume on Romero.
Yeah.
I think that he ran the risk, if he slowed the pace, of not being in any less danger and giving Romero a chance to catch his breath, to recover, to kind of fill the space with more processed shots of his own. Like, I think it's worth the risk of working at a quicker pace and putting yourself in range with Romero more often if the alternative is just having a fresh Yoel Romero who can explode at any time.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, I understand what you're going with, but I think it's a really delicate trade-off. I actually think there's a good case to be made that you're right here, but I also think that Romero's only demonstrated weakness is his gas tank. And if you're going into a fight with a plan, the plan had probably better be to make this dude work. Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, it's like you are trading with the guy whose whole thing is extremely dangerous in spots, and you are, I don't know, you're also trading with a guy who at times, who quite often, in fact, seems to just give whole moments of the fight away, where maybe you could just be touching him and not putting so much effort into trying to sting him and still be banking the rounds from a safer range with a safer selection of weapons.
Yeah, but I think I'm going to push back just a little bit, because I think the misread is that you're not really trading with Romero. What you're doing, because I don't think Romero is like a trading kind of guy, really. I mean, he will throw back at you. He's becoming increasingly dangerous as a counterpuncher. That's another kind of facet to this fight that I think we saw. But really, I think it's more that Romero's going to make his reads regardless. And if you fill that space with you actively hurting him and making him work and making him react, maybe you can overload the computer a little bit. Maybe, but I think that's a viable read. I think if he were going to fight him a third time, Whittaker would probably say, "You're right, I don't need to do as much." But I think going into this fight,
I mean, Steph, there's a logic to it for sure. There's some solid rationale behind the way that Whittaker fought here.
I think you're probably right after the fact. I think I'm probably right knowing what we knew going into this fight, which is what we learned from this fight is that that Romero is probably the only guy that you can't overload with information.
Yeah, but Robert Whittaker's so good, Pat. He's so fucking good at this.
Well, but that's what I mean is like, Whittaker made exactly the right read, which is to think, okay, if this guy is just going to adjust and read me and figure out ways to figure out what I'm doing before I do it, then the way to do that is to give him too much to think about. And I think that's exactly the right play. But what we learned and had no way of knowing going into this is that you can't actually do that.
Yeah. Which, how could you expect that?
Yeah, so I think so I've come around. I think you're probably right knowing what we know now.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
You probably could have done less.
I
think you're probably right.
I mean, like, I just don't know. This has been like 20 minutes, Pat. I feel like there's so much to say about this fight that has not been said. Like, I don't know. What else to cover? Let me see what I have in my notes here.
Let's talk a little bit, like, real quick. Let's talk a little bit. Okay, do you want to talk about scoring? How did you score it?
Okay, I did not make an attempt to rescore it or to come up with like I was way too into the fight to dampen my excitement and try to come up with a very stoic judge style score. I thought the 48-47 Whittaker sounded fine. I would have absolutely understood if it had gone Romero's way. I was a little surprised that no judge was tempted to give Romero a single 10-8. But I also, just in the moment, didn't feel like giving Romero those 10-8s either because Whittaker fought back so hard every time he was hurt.
Yeah, I think on my second viewing, I was more inclined to give Romero a 10-8
in which round?
I was watching it live. I'm sorry?
In the third or the fifth?
In the third, really.
Yeah. That was maybe one of the most hurt I have seen a fighter and still somehow recover to the point that they are hurting the opponent in return by the end of the round and then winning the round after that. Yeah.
I mean, but so I'm not mad about the outcome of the fight at all, especially, and I know you're not supposed to do this, but kind of given everything that's gone on around it, like with Romero missing weight twice.
Yeah.
and Whittaker having beaten him beforehand, I'm fine with the outcome of this fight being Whittaker is still the champion. Romero moves up to 205, and both guys get to go just murder somebody else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I want Whittaker to the thing is it was pointed out to me on Twitter, like, boy, I hope that Whittaker hasn't taken too much damage too early in his career. I'm going to make a bold statement here and say that I have a really hard time imagining anyone other than Yoel Romero giving Whittaker this kind of fight in this division.
Yeah.
After watching him arguably, at the very least, win. He definitely won one time, and then arguably winning the second time. I think a perfectly defensible victory for him that he should not be ashamed about. After seeing how he won this kind of fight, I'm like, can Chris Weidman or Kelvin Gastelum bring that out of him? Does he have to go into that gear to beat them, or can he manage them in a way that Yoel Romero just can't be managed? And I think
Whittaker,
he can.
I think after these fights, Whittaker is going to emerge into the much more defensively sound, borderline untouchable phase of his career, where I think we're going to see some dominating wins from him.
His defense is already remarkably good. You just don't get to notice it that much because he's so aggressive.
Well, and because Romero is one of the most accurate punchers we've ever seen.
Yeah, and Romero
that guy just barely misses.
Yeah, exactly. And Romero still did not have an easy time landing on Whittaker in this or in their first fight.
Yeah, but so if you put Whittaker in there with Rockhold, who is currently ranked the number 2 contender according to the UFC, I think Whittaker finishes him. If you put him in there with Weidman, I think Whittaker finishes him. If you put him in there with Gastelum, I think Whittaker either finishes him on the feet or beats him up so badly on the ground that he gets an easy rear naked choke. We already saw him finish Jacare. We already saw him finish Brunson.
Yeah.
You want to keep moving down the list of fighters in this division. I think he finishes each of his next challengers pretty handily.
Wouldn't it be fun? I'm not saying this just to annoy our dear listener, Luca Bourdon, but wouldn't it be fun to watch Whittaker out-wrestle Adesanya at some point?
Oh, my God, yeah.
That would be a joy, wouldn't it?
Just watch him blast double this guy in what is supposed to be an incredible striking matchup. Yeah. And then once Adesanya is tired and frustrated, watch Whittaker piece him up on the feet. Yeah. Because that's what would happen.
Yeah. I want to end this segment. I want to give I didn't get a chance to plug it last week because the secret is we recorded that episode in advance. Because I was out of the country, but I want to retroactively plug the article I put out last week, which I'm pretty proud of. Was a very lengthy breakdown of the skill set of Robert Whittaker, in which I sort of imagined that he might go down as the next or the new Anderson Silva. I think he really has the potential to be that kind of legendary fighter in this division. But I want to end this segment, I guess, saying what I sort of mentioned in that article, which is that Robert Whittaker is maybe the best learning on the job, the best at learning on the job in this sport since George St. Pierre. Romero is up there too. Let's be honest. Romero is up there too, and how far he has progressed from being just a wrestler to doing all this other stuff. But Whittaker has developed such a complete game that, the fact that he wrestles for wrestling's sake, the fact that the man wears a singlet and competes in tournaments and fully understands that being an MMA fighter is nothing but being really good at a bunch of different stuff. And you have to get really good at a bunch of different stuff if you want to be able to use that in your fights. Yeah,
there's something to be said because Whittaker did not have a prior career. He started fighting very young. I think he started fighting in MMA when he was 17. And he is a good example of how you take the quote unquote complete fighter who understands transitions and whatnot and actually turns that into a dominating guy. And that the thing there is we've talked a lot about this over the years. If your whole game is transitions, which is what we see from a lot of kind of MMA native type fighters, eventually you're going to get stuck in there with somebody who can block your transition and is just going to beat the shit out of you in one phase.
Because your whole game is sorry, go on.
Yeah, but Whittaker has gotten around that by just getting incredibly good at each individual skill set, in addition to having that kind of baseline understanding of how transitions work.
Yeah, because if your whole style is about transitions, is about finding these really MMA specific moments between, core stylistic skill sets, then to my mind you're kind of you're hunting for loopholes rather than like trying to write an airtight contract yourself. Robert Whittaker, if you treat the game the way Robert Whittaker does, where you're like, okay, I'm going to learn to box. I'm going to learn to wrestle. I'm going to compete in wrestling. I'm going to compete in jiu-jitsu. I'm going to cover all of these bases and treat these various ancient martial arts with the respect they each deserve, then it's like the transitions come naturally. Like Whittaker is so incredibly good at fighting in these bizarre positions. And some of that does come down to athleticism. It's hard to notice looking at them, but like he really is almost as good of an athlete as Yoel Romero. He's up there. He's an incredible athlete. But you don't catch him in weird positions between, because he understands each of these arts fully enough to know how they fit together naturally. Because like the principles are all the same. You don't have to learn for MMA to the extent that I think maybe we've always thought you do. You have to respect the arts themselves. And then you'd be like, oh, okay, I get it. Now I understand how fighting works. And Whittaker's just a fighter. I think the kind of
ancillary benefit to that Whittaker has picked up on, and that a lot of other guys have picked up on too, is that each of these, like boredom, when you have been a professional fighter for most of your adult life, is a real thing. You can get stuck in patterns. You can get bored or worn out or burned out with all of these different things. And when you delve into individual arts, it seems like the way that Whittaker has, that stops you from getting bored.
Yeah. It's like Damian Maia. His second love was wrestling. And like that's how wrestling is for Whittaker right now, I think. And it's some guys need a routine, but for most people, I think it's more interesting to challenge yourself.
Yeah, well, like that's how GSP kept himself interested. Is like he's like, oh, I'm going to go wrestle with Canadian Olympians,
even to the extent of I'm doing gymnastics now.
Yeah, or I'm going to go train jiu-jitsu with incredible jiu-jitsu people, or I'm going to go to Thailand, or I'm going to go work with Freddie Roach. And it's not just that like that makes you better at what you do; it's that it keeps you engaged.
Yeah,
as your career goes on. Yeah. So
you're still a martial artist. You still feel creative, and like you still have something to prove, something to do.
Exactly. I had one more thing that I wanted to ask you.
Yes, just one.
Let's assume that assuming Romero moves up to light heavyweight, I think that's a given at this point. Who would you like to see him fight?
Luke Rockhold. His
first fight at 205.
Luke Rockhold.
You want to see him fight Luke Rockhold against 205? Okay.
Luke Rockhold's nightmares made real. That he moves up only to fight Yoel a second time.
Sound that like kill shot uppercut made against the fence. I've never heard a punch make that sound, and I hope I never do again.
Oh, that was cruel. Who should he fight at light heavyweight? Hold on, Pat. Let me bring up the rankings, because this is what covering MMA is talking about these fighters every day to the extent that you forget who's in what division. Mm-hmm. Gosh, he would wreck all of these people, wouldn't he? I guess I'd like to see. I mean, there's no point in bringing Romero in softly, but there's also no point in like. Knocking off, I don't know, I don't know. None of this is even interesting. Light heavyweight sucks so hard, Pat.
It's really bad, but I'm going to throw Jan Blachowicz out there.
Oh, don't do that. Why?
Because Latifi is still kind of interesting as a fighter. I think Latifi and Blachowicz are your two choices.
What you're saying is you don't care if Blachowicz gets killed.
I mean, kind of, but also
he's expendable.
No, I think Latifi or Blachowicz, because Teixeira, Özdemir, and Gustafsson are all kind of like, I guess we could slap together a title fight here.
Yeah. Whereas
Latifi, I don't think anybody really thinks he's a title contender, and Blachowicz, I don't think anybody really thinks he's a title contender. But you want to put Romero out there. You want to let him style a little bit, and I think either of those guys gives him a chance to style.
Yeah.
And they're both credible enough that they allow him to kind of get his way into a big fight after that.
Yeah, and I don't say this just because I love Jan Blachowicz so much and want him to be my boyfriend and we can play The Witcher 3 together, but he could actually make for, until the moment that Romero inevitably finished it, a pretty interesting style matchup.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like a good process-driven kickboxer who knows how to wrestle, who's sturdy in the clinch, who's really big. That's why I like Blachowicz, is I think he would actually test Romero. in interesting ways at 205.
Enough to be like, okay, here's a bigger guy doing this kind of stuff. And, like Luke Rockhold and Robert Whittaker both blasted your face off with triple jabs at various points. How are you going to deal with it when a slightly bigger guy does it? And also it's okay because you can choose to take him down at any moment if that's what you really need to do.
Yeah, I think that's the fight. I think that's the fight I'd like to see. But
I'm on board, much as I love Jan, but I'm on board.
Yeah, these are two of the guys. I mean, both Whittaker and Romero. It's just sad more people didn't watch this. The early estimates of pay-per-view buys are really low, like 150,000 for this.
I mean, the UFC has something really, really special on their hands that hopefully has a long future in Robert Whittaker. If they were smart, they would do what like HBO Boxing does and run this pay-per-view on free TV or, on cable, rather, the week after it airs. Because people need to see this kind of performance from both guys. It's a shame that not many people saw this.
Yeah, but at any rate, I think we've said more than enough here.
Yeah, we probably have, and I still have so much to say, but we have to move on for the sake of pacing. So when we come back, we're going to look into the rest of UFC 225. That means, of course, the dreaded co-main event between Rafael dos Anjos and Colby Covington. We're also going to talk about Holly Holm versus Megan Anderson. A couple of Australians clapped back at us for being angry about that last week, so maybe we'll touch on that as well. And we're going to get through a few other bouts on this preliminary undercard as well, because as I said, especially compared to the shit we've been getting lately, so much of this felt relevant and interesting. I'm having a hard time not wanting to talk about it. So all of that and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back. We've been dreading this one, Pat. We've been dreading this. Colby Covington did it. He got there. He won the fight. It was, I think, as you very correctly insisted on last week, the kind of style matchup that Rafael dos Anjos has lost every time he has encountered it. It was almost, as I pointed out last week, the perfect time at both his and Colby Covington's careers for him to actually be able to win that kind of style matchup. I think in many ways this was one of Rafael dos Anjos' best back foot boxing performances. He showed some really nice adaptation down the stretch, and it almost seemed like his legendary stamina was going to win out a little bit in the end, except Colby Covington realized at last that he's a pressure fighter and really, really leaned into that style. And for the guy who we didn't praise, but the guy we evaluated as being very attached to his process, this was a perfectly process-driven performance from Colby Covington to win a totally meaningless interim welterweight championship.
Yeah. I think at this point, Covington deserves a lot of credit for what he showed here. So... But the biggest thing that he deserves credit for is figuring out exactly who and what he is as a fighter. I mean, there's no hesitation in him at all. He knows exactly what he's supposed to do, exactly what gives him the best chance of winning, how the different pieces of his game go together, how he relies on durability, cardio, and just sheer ass willingness to not think at all before he does something.
He is a doer through and through.
Yes, those are admirable characteristics for a fighter. There's no fucking around with his game. He goes out there and does exactly what he needs to do to win a fight. That's exactly what he did here. And, sometimes you watch a fight and you can tell from the first exchange what the result is going to be. Doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to happen in between then and the result to get you there, but you have a pretty good sense for how it's going to end. This was a fight where the first time Covington backed RDA up, you were like, oh, okay, it's going to be one of those.
No, that's going to happen. Yeah, Yeah, and then it really...
And it's not like RDA didn't have his moments, but I think you knew from the first time it happened just how easy it was for Covington to back RDA up, that was it.
And then the subsequent 30 seconds of RDA being pushed against the fence. And then as the sort of the entirety of Covington's game plan, such as it was, began to set in, the kicks to push RDA backwards, the relentless countering and advancing every single time he would throw a punch. Yeah, it became clear very shortly into this bout that unless, the reason we like combat sports above all others, one of the reasons at least, is that anything can happen at any moment. And, everybody knows the best board games are the ones where you can be way ahead and then you lose in an instant. The best card games are like that too. They're the most exciting. That is what makes MMA and fighting sports so special. But without a moment like that, it was still pretty abundantly clear that this was the same kind of style matchup that Dos Anjos has failed to overcome in the past. And I think Covington did everything in his power, and I assume that Mike Brown bears a pretty significant part in this as well. But it has to be said, Covington did everything in his power to emphasize what the style matchup was, to make it so that he was, again, always doing that. The only one having to think about what was happening in front of them was Dos Anjos. Over and over and over again, Dos Anjos never, ever got the moment's rest that almost any other kind of fighter would have given him, given the kind of counters and the level of skill that he was showing in response. Covington just knew that he was playing a meta game. He was playing a strategy, and the tactics were kind of secondary. Even to the point that Mike Brown was pointing out tactical changes, and I don't think Covington did any of them. He just kept doing things, and that's what mattered.
Yeah, I will say I was disappointed in Dos Anjos' performance, not because of the basic nature of the matchup, which was that if he got pushed back, he wasn't going to win, but because when he did have opportunities, he could not bring himself to pull the trigger. There were a couple of spots where he did, but there were a fair few times, especially in I think in the third round, in those kind of interstitial spaces, and in the fourth especially, where Dos Anjos had his spots. Covington let his foot off the gas for a minute. Yeah. He was kind of backing up. He wasn't paying attention to where he was in the cage. Where Dos Anjos, if he had pressed the action, if he had been willing to let it rip in combination, he could have made something happen, and he just couldn't. I thought that was pretty disappointing.
Yeah. He couldn't seem to grasp the nature of the matchup. Like, he couldn't seem to grasp that every single. Jason Perillo, I think, tried to impress this upon him in the corner. He did mention after the first round, you have to back him up. Whenever you back him up one step, you have to then immediately jump on that opportunity and try to continue backing him up. Yeah. But Dos Anjos, I think, was like. All of his experience has mostly taught him that you get a couple seconds to think about what you want to do. When the other guy takes a step back, that especially in MMA, the opponent tends to give you a turn. Even a pressure fighting opponent tends to give you your turn. And that was the I hate to say brilliance of what Covington did. Dos Anjos he didn't really get any turns. He didn't take turns with him. He kept stealing Dos Anjos' turn. He kept making him think he was going to get a chance, and then he just kept going. So
yeah, no, I think that's exactly correct. And we talked before the fight about whether Jason Perillo was exactly the right guy for Dos Anjos in this matchup, because who better to teach kind of footwork and boxing and things like that, the tools that he was going to need. I kind of wonder if it wouldn't have been better for Dos Anjos if he'd been with somebody who was just going to drill into him attack.
Back with Cordero still.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about that. That thought occurred to me about midway through the second round. If the right way to approach Covington isn't to try to deal with the game that Covington wants to play, but to focus entirely on the game you want to play.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what Maya did, and it almost worked. It's just like stand your ground and keep swinging. Yeah, I had the same thought because. I have to give some credit to the things Covington did to force these bad reactions out of Dos Anjos. The fact that Covington, he did what Tony Ferguson does super well. He pressured with kicks a lot. He would really just step into these kicks, knowing that there was a good chance he was going to get hit back, he did a fairly good job getting his head offline when he kicked, actually, and maintaining his distance and his stance when he kicked. Like, got to say, his striking technique looked improved, notably in this fight. So I have to give credit to that because, like, he has these long arcing strikes. He gave Dos Anjos something to think about, so that maybe that's why Dos Anjos didn't want to step off to the side when he was being pressured. But also, again and again, Dos Anjos would want to back up to get space linearly. And what he needed to do was to do what what Manny Stewart used to call backing up without backing up. You know, like the Ray Robinson thing, where you just pump off a jab while you circle to your left, and it feels like you're drawing away from the guy. The pressure fighter might still come after you and feel like he has momentum, but he's running into things, and he can't quite seem to keep you in his sights. And you have to keep facing him without him facing you, and that's how you get space. You're not really creating distance. You're getting your so-called space through angles. And I agree. I was a little disappointed that Dos Anjos was really never able to do that. He adapted wonderfully in the clinch. He had some really nice off angles in the clinch. It was great when he started hitting that overhook and frame to slip out to the underhook side. That threw Covington off a bit, but he had to get himself against the fence before he would start using his lateral movement. And he got himself against the fence a lot because of that. So, it was a little bit of a letdown. But also, I mean, probably because I was somewhat emotionally invested in Dos Anjos performing well. And, my read on this fight was essentially it was this kind of matchup. And that maybe Colby Covington was not quite at that Khabib Nurmagomedov point with, like, having a full understanding of the metagame to make it work against Dos Anjos. That Dos Anjos might still be capable of changing his mind with some choice shots and with some, significantly sharper technique.
Yeah, I think we talked ourselves into this, fully aware of what the dynamics of the matchup were, and I think I remember saying, I think I've talked myself into this.
Yeah,
and so
I want it to happen.
Yeah, so this was not surprising to me at all, and in fact, I think I was kind of half expecting it, which is why it was not all that surprising when that first exchange. It was like, oh, he's just not going to be able to deal with this.
Yeah.
So, but what do you make for both guys moving forward here? We know now what Covington is capable of. How do you think he matches up? Let's assume he gets that matchup with Woodley. What do you think that fight looks like?
Oh boy. Yeah. The dynamic is like a much dumber, simpler version of this dynamic, where it's like Woodley will already be against the fence, most likely. I mean, Woodley's he's a smart guy. He's always capable of surprising, and occasionally he will do something you really did not expect. He sure pressured the shit out of Robbie Lawler, but he has to he typically has to be given an invitation to pressure. And even then, Stephen Thompson sent him about 36 invitations to pressure, and he didn't take that many of them. He didn't RSVP that often. So basically, we have Woodley against the fence and Covington storming forward, but Woodley being tremendously, like, Romero-esque in his dangerousness in single moments. So I guess it's a cool style matchup. Because Covington is still tremendously hittable. So, I don't know. What do you think of it?
I think it really depends on how well Covington takes a punch and how well Woodley can, I guess, make Covington think about that power.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, like, the thing with that matchup is there are some interesting dynamics that I'm not willing to hope for. Like things that I would have to hope for the fight to be more nuanced than just, well, either Covington gets knocked out doing what Covington does, or he doesn't and then wins. For example, I would be interested.
But sometimes you don't need to overthink things.
Yeah,
and I think that kind of is the dynamic of the fight.
Yeah. I mean, it would be interesting if, for example, Woodley were to lean on his offensive wrestling. RDA had some pretty notable success shooting for takedowns, and as we will mention when we get to the Holly Holm Megan Anderson fight, Megan Anderson. So sorry, Australians. That is a very, very effective way of cutting off pressure, of forcing somebody who doesn't want to think, who just wants to move forward, to think. or else just be taken down again and again. And I feel like Woodley is a quality enough wrestler to do that. But yeah, it's like a matchup where Covington has discovered that, I should just expect to survive punches to the chin and rely on my stamina and wrestle a lot. And seems pretty simple, I guess, as many of Woodley's matchups do. Simple, but not exactly all that predictable.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the dynamics there is like, the kind of face-melting power of Tyron Woodley.
Yeah.
Point number one. Point number two, when they clinch, because I don't think Covington can straight up take Woodley down. And so if they end up in the clinch, will it be Covington's activity or Woodley's ability to just be really fucking strong and pin you against the fence and kind of hold you in place for long periods of time to slow you down and take some starch out of your feathers? Like, I don't know. I mean, I think it actually, it's interesting because it's the ultimate doer versus the ultimate nullifier, I guess.
Yeah.
Where
it's interesting it's much more interesting to think about than it will be to watch. Or hopefully more interesting to watch than it is to think about, I should say, because it's kind of just like two things that should cancel each other out, but that doesn't happen that often in fighting. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't really want to see it bad, if I'm honest. I don't really care all that much at this point. When it comes around, maybe my mind will have changed. But since the lead-up will involve Colby Covington talking, I don't expect that to actually be the case. Yeah. I'll be rooting for Tyron, I can tell you that much.
Woodley had a really perceptive point. He was talking about Covington on Instagram Live, and like the pull quotes that people went with when they were the things that they took from this were all like, Woodley says he's going to kill Covington worse than he's ever wanted to kill anybody before, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought the really perceptive point that Woodley made as he was talking about how badly he wants to murder Colby Covington was that the only reason that Covington is a thing right now is because there ain't shit else going on. And everybody is so desperate for there to be something happening in MMA that you're willing to take a guy who like basically can't talk, like when anybody is talking back to him at all. Did you see Bisping kind of eviscerate him?
No,
when Covington tried to talk shit? This is like, oh yeah,
you don't want to step to Bisping, man. Don't try and cut your teeth against the count, for real. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it was not a pretty situation, but it's like the guy can't talk back. He's not Chael Sonnen, he's not Conor McGregor. His shtick is very straightforward, and it's like this is only working in the absence of other things. And at least for me, maybe other people feel differently, I am not inclined to click on an article that's like Colby Covington said this. I'm inclined to tune him out and then maybe tune in hoping the guy gets knocked out.
Yeah. And I don't really like, as I said before we were talking about this, I wasn't really excited when this fight started. I was hella excited for the main event. Yeah. And it wasn't even like I had one guy. By the fight's end, as I think I always do at this point, I ended up rooting for Robert Whittaker. I just really like the guy, and I have a vested interest in seeing him win. But, I was invested in both guys in that matchup and didn't have like a real horse in the race and was still tremendously excited. Despite having like no real sense of narrative, I just knew I was about to see something incredible. And despite the easy narrative there is behind every single Colby Covington fight, the classic Mayweather patented method of, I hate this guy and therefore want to see him lose, it doesn't work. Like, I don't really.
He doesn't. There's a difference between heel heat and just shut the fuck up heat. He has just shut the fuck up heat, but not heel heat.
Yeah,
Mayweather always had that heel heat.
Yeah, and he's not like, I don't know. He's like that guy. He's like the cousin of your friend who like lives in the country. You go hang out with your friend, and you're like, oh fuck, Dan decided to show up. Dan's here, and you just like try to find ways of like running into the woods when Dan goes to the bathroom, and like just trying to lose him any way you can.
Yeah.
Colby Covington is Dan, and I don't want to see Dan. But, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about RDA, because I still care about RDA, and I don't think this fight spells any kind of end of RDA's hopes as a welterweight contender. He still looked in tremendously good shape. He still looked like he had his reflexes and his speed. He was disappointingly incapable of adapting to a style matchup that has given him trouble in the past, but he's certainly not the first fighter to struggle against the same kind of opponent again and again and again. What do you want to see him do next?
I would not mind seeing him fight Stephen Thompson.
I like the sound of that a lot.
Seems really interesting to me.
Yeah.
That's really, like, at this point, I would also like to see him fight Jorge Masvidal.
I like that too.
That's a fight I would like to see. I don't know that you need to go around trying to rush Rafael dos Anjos back into kind of contention. I think at this point, okay, he didn't win this fight. You've got a whole raft of kind of young up-and-comers. Put him in entertaining and interesting fights with other guys who kind of had their shots. So I think Stephen Thompson is the perfect one. That headlines a fight night. That's a fun fight. I would watch that.
I like the sound of that a lot. And the dynamic of it sounds pretty interesting because we get Dos Anjos being invited to pressure, which is still definitely his A game. And
we finally get to see somebody who's willing and able to kick Stephen Thompson's legs.
Yes, absolutely. And we get to see Stephen Thompson against somebody who will do that, try to do things to him, which is also what makes Stephen Thompson exciting to watch.
Yeah.
So I'm down for that.
I think that's the right fight to make.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And again, like, Dos Anjos is still improving here. He's still, he's I have to give him some credit because he's fighting against type and trying to fight that kind of fight against Colby Covington. You could critique him as we sort of did softly and say that wasn't the right kind of fight to try to fight against Covington or whatever. But like, he's still getting better as a fighter. He's still sharpening up his specific techniques, and he still looks really good. So I'm still excited to watch RDA fight again. And I don't, and very likely, like we say, there's a lot of up-and-comers in this welterweight division, but it still kind of feels like a dead division at the moment. I wouldn't be shocked if Covington fights Woodley, say Covington loses, say Covington wins, then RDA is probably in a worse position, having clearly lost to him already. But say Covington loses, if RDA beats the likes of a Jorge Masvidal or a Stephen Thompson, it could be like his lightweight championship run back in the day, where he loses the fight, and then suddenly he's right back in the mix. Like who did he lose to back in the day? He lost to Khabib. And then it was like, oh, okay. He was on a streak. He lost to Khabib. Back on another streak. He was right back in the mix. So he's still an extremely good fighter, and his skill set is diverse enough that he can hang with a lot of other much more limited welterweights in this division.
Yeah.
Okay. It's done. It's gone. Colby Covington, he has a belt, but it's okay. We don't have to talk about it anymore. We get to take a break and give us an hour to regenerate our interest and excitement, and we will come back to you with several other fights that are definitely worth talking about and worth getting amped about from this card. We're talking about Claudia Gadelha versus Carla Esparza. We're talking about Curtis Blaydes versus Alistair Overeem. Meaningful fights that create contenders here. We're talking about Holly Holm versus Megan Anderson, and maybe a couple more besides after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to segment 3. We are amped, we're excited, we're up again, we're high energy. Let's talk about the women's featherweight bout here. Holly Holm, Megan Anderson. Anything at all surprise you about this fight, Pat? Last week we were pretty damn sure that Holly Holm had a strong advantage here. Did her advantages reveal themselves in a different way than you maybe expected? You there? I think you're muted.
Shit. Yeah, sorry.
You're good.
I really thought that Holm would have more success in the striking and would kind of struggle a little bit more to impose her B game of takedowns and clinching. And really it was the opposite. Megan Anderson, whenever she got her momentum going, really kind of carved Holm up. I thought she did a good job of pressuring Holm. Outside of Chris Cyborg, I don't think we've seen anybody pressure Holm that effectively.
Yeah.
In terms of her ability to move her backward. Now, I think to some extent, Holm was okay with getting walked backward because she knew that was going to draw Anderson into range to hit takedowns and clinches. So I think that Holm was maybe not trying quite as hard to be evasive as we've seen from her in the past. But I was shocked at how many good shots Anderson was able to land on Holm when given an opportunity to do so. On the other hand, Anderson just has no idea how to wrestle and grapple at an elite level. She just does not know how to do that, and maybe she'll learn that. But as of right now, she has no fucking idea what she's doing. So
yeah, all of that. Let's talk about Anderson briefly here first. I think you're right. Her reach, I think, is what really gave Holly Holm trouble. I was immediately reminded. I mean, granted, like it was only really the first 45 seconds where Holm really was troubled by what Megan Anderson was doing. But she was having difficulty with those long arms. And I was immediately reminded, as I probably should have been last week, of Holm's dreadful loss to Anna Sophia Mathis, who also was taller and had much longer arms than her. And that really, really gave Holly some problems because she has this, this much analyzed way, at least by me, of committing her body and therefore her face to every punch she throws, of sort of short arming by not turning her shoulders and using her reach, and sort of running off, like she tries to joust her left hand in there and then run off to the side, giving up her stance. Her particular way of punching does not take full advantage of the kind of range from which she likes to fight. She has to do a little more work and take a little more risk than she probably should. But Megan Anderson definitely can't wrestle. And I think that is a very important thing to talk about. The most telling thing before this fight, maybe I should have expected. Last week I said, Holly Holm will hold her against the fence. And she sure did. But I maybe should have expected more takedowns. Given the instinct that Holm showed way back in the Ronda Rousey fight to change levels and shoot as a response to pressure, which is a great switch up, right? That's her whole game with striking anyway, is you walk in and she changes angle and then shoots in a shot. And changing levels and hitting your hips while you're coming in high with punches is the same exact idea. And it's great to have two versions of the same idea to keep the pressuring opponent guessing, to make a pressuring opponent think. The kind of stuff that RDA could have used more of against Colby Covington. But still, the reason I maybe should have seen that coming more is because I watched Megan Anderson's fight with Charmaine Tweet. And I remembered the wrestling in that fight. And it wasn't her defensive wrestling. I don't think Tweet got her down at all. And God save her if Tweet had gotten her down, because it's not exactly a great wrestler to get taken down by. But I remembered Megan Anderson shooting on Charmaine Tweet, getting completely in on her hips, Tweet not sprawling, and Anderson not being able to finish the takedown. And I think that says kind of what we touched on before as regarding Robert Whittaker. Like, she doesn't know how to wrestle. At a certain point, you can say, why is your takedown defense not good? Why is it this? Why is it that? What are the MMA questions that you're not answering? But at a certain point, just the skill set itself is not good enough.
Holm, like when Holm shot a head outside single on her, Anderson literally didn't know how to defend it.
She didn't have the basics. She didn't have the basic responses.
She didn't know to push down on the head. She didn't know she had no idea what she was doing. And the fence was right there. Yeah. She was only like 2 feet from the fence. She could have bounced backward to the fence, worked to push Holm's head down, limp leg, and escape. She just didn't know how to do that.
There were some moments where, like James Krause, who, by the way, came off pretty well as a cornerman. I quite liked.
He always does. I think he's a pretty good cornerman.
Yeah, I quite liked the way he handled this fight, and Anderson had a hard time complying. And you could maybe critique the kind of preparation she's gotten in the gym with Krause's team for not preparing her for what he wanted her to do in the fight. But there's a silver lining in that. When he coached Anderson to walk her feet on the fence and buck her hips to get Holm off of her inside control, Anderson pretty quickly complied. She followed the instructions. That to me is a sign of someone who, even when they're clearly losing the fight, one of their first really big fights, is composed enough to listen to their corner. It also speaks, I think, to a certain level of coachability, which is always a good thing, being able to just take instructions and learn kind of quickly. But the fact that she had to be told to put her feet on the fence to get some leverage for her hips is a problem, because her ground game was almost as bad as her takedown defense, as her stand-up wrestling. She was so static. She was not... There was no sense of progression in any of her clinch or ground fighting. where she was never like advancing position. She was never actively attacking the position that Holm was trying to secure against her. You know what I mean? She wasn't destabilizing. She wasn't moving her hips. She was like waiting for Holm to stop, whether Holm was shooting for a takedown or whatever. And that's not a great sign. Granted, she's an Australian fighter, and Robert Whittaker's the only Australian fighter in history to know how to wrestle. But that has to be shored up. And I would have kind of hoped that 11 fights into her career, 10 fights into her career, she would have some semblance of wrestling knowledge. But she just didn't know what to do. I don't know.
Yeah, it was not great. I mean, but I don't know. I think it seems to me a little bit like Holm is maybe edging toward the end of her career. I think she gets one more big fight. I wouldn't mind seeing her in there with Amanda Nunes if they're not going to do Nunes Cyborg. But I think she's probably nearing the end. Anderson is close to the beginning, but the problem is there are not a lot of like kind of intermediate opponents for Anderson to sharpen herself on in the interim.
Yeah.
So, yikes.
Yeah, I mean, she's already fought Holly Holm and lost, and by the time she probably gets good enough to have a justified second shot at someone like Holly Holm, Holm will probably be retired. And it's just a very young and a sickly division, shall we say. Not a lot of meat on the bones. How about Holly Holm, though? She's nearing the end of her career. You think, why is that? Why do you say that, rather?
Because she is, I think she's 36 or 37.
Yeah, almost 37, as she said.
She looked slower.
Yeah.
To me in this fight. It's good that she's rounding out her game, and that's going to buy her wins, like the one that she got here. Like when an old dog learns some new tricks, that's going to give you some time against opponents who are not at the very top shelf. But Holm has a kind of a secondary version of the problem we just talked about with Anderson, where there are not lots of intermediate opponents for her. So either she's going to be fighting the very, very best, such as exist, or she's going to be fighting fighters that she can kind of win with a combination of grit, durability, and veteran savvy. And
it's compounded by the fact that, like, I don't think she and her management want to fight any intermediate opponents. That the only way she'll fight an opponent on the level of Anderson is if, as Anderson was, that opponent has enough hype for it to still feel like a big fight.
Yeah, I'm with you right there.
And otherwise, Holly Holm, I think, is at the point in her career, not unjustifiably, where she feels like she just deserves big fights.
Yeah, well, and if you're the UFC and you're paying her a lot of money, I mean, I think she's making a couple $100,000 a fight. Like, I mean, let me see if I can pull this up here. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Trying to come up with
something approaching an accurate figure.
Yeah, so she made $300,000 to fight Cyborg. I would imagine she probably made at least a couple $100,000 to fight Megan Anderson. There's no money for the UFC in putting her in there to fight Betch Kohea again.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I agree with you. I would like to see Holm fight somebody like Amanda Nunes. I mean, I come away from a performance like this having a lot of respect for Holly Holm. She's even, I said this earlier, but even if she is the female Stephen Thompson, which she is, both in terms of extremely likable, respectable personality, and also in terms of penchant for terribly dull fights when the style matchup isn't exactly the kind she needs. Despite all of that, I really like, I don't know, like Holm came into this with a really good game plan. She said in the post-fight interview, she just kind of lets the game plan be open-ended. But I kind of think she must have planned to do a lot of wrestling to get Anderson down as much as she did in this fight. And even if she didn't, like, I have to respect her professionalness, her professionality as
professionalism.
A fighter. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. That's an English word. I have to respect her professionalism as a fighter. That she is like 36, and she's still just plugging the hell away. She is still adding to her skill set, and and just making like smart choices. I really liked how her wrestling looked in this fight. It wasn't the best wrestling I've ever seen. She had to drive awfully hard to take down an opponent who clearly did not know how to sprawl. But she's not a native wrestler, and she's not particularly explosive.
And she looks better in the clinch, more dangerous in the clinch than she's looked in past fights.
True. And she was also mean on the ground. And I liked seeing her, like, I don't know if she was trying to prove points, but I liked seeing her kind of letting it hang out there a little bit and really pushing to have a dominant, decisive victory. And it felt like that. It felt like, oh, Holly Holm is significantly better than Megan Anderson right now.
Yeah,
and
I don't disagree.
You don't want to be fighting an opponent like Megan Anderson at this point in her career, if you're Holly Holm, and not leave fans feeling like, oh, you were way better than that person. So I have to respect that kind of performance. And I'm with you. Holly Holm versus Amanda Nunes sounds pretty interesting to me. So it might not be that fun to watch.
Yeah, so if Holly Holm is the old veteran hanging on, Tai Tuivasa is the young guy on the way up. What did you make of his performance against Andrei Arlovski?
Well, the guy who only has seen the first round successfully fought a 3-round distance, and that is always, always a very good sign in my mind. He could have been Rashad Coulter, if you know what I mean, who he just doesn't learn. He's the guy who burns every ounce of energy trying to get that early finish, and he falls apart when it doesn't happen. Andrei Arlovski was the savviest veteran Andrei Arlovski has ever been. He fought a really intelligent fight and took some tremendous shots. As once in a blue moon, Andrei Arlovski has the best chin on the planet. And then the rest of the time, he shares a gene pool with Alistair Overeem. But Arlovski, I think, gave Tuivasa a lot to worry about, and I was astounded. I really was, by how calm and composed Tuivasa remained. How he's clearly one of those fighters who, when you clip him with a good combination, he does not lose his cool. He becomes cooler. He zeroes in and gets to business. He becomes very serious and begins to think very hard about how he's going to approach you. He begins to plan combinations and put pressure on, and he responds, but he responds not emotionally. He responds intelligently when he's under duress. And he looks like a pretty good heavyweight prospect as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed by his quickness. I was impressed by his cardio. I was impressed by how calm he stayed. Yeah, I mean, even though it was obvious, Arlovski at various points had him outcrafted. Yeah. Tuivasa was not craftless himself. He was not spamming shitty shots. There was a clear thought process behind what he was throwing and when. I thought there was a lot of smarts to his game.
Just simple things that the kind of things that an inexperienced fighter tends to quickly forget when the fight really gets going. You throw the right hand and it slightly lands, and then Arlovski's waiting for you to do it again. So this time you throw it away and come back with the left hook. Just being able to build on the patterns that you're establishing as the fight unfolds, while the other guy who hits as hard as Arlovski does is hitting you in the chin and busting up your face. He had to rely on his youth, but there's nothing wrong with that when you're the young guy fighting an old dog like Arlovski. There was some craft there, and he kind of looks like a worthy Mark Hunt protege, where it's he's got this tremendous power and all this, but he's a lot smarter than people will probably be giving him credit for as a fighter.
Yeah, he really does have a kind of a mini Mark Hunt thing going in the best way possible. So just a tremendous athlete.
Oh, absolutely. And getting skinnier too, which I like to see. He looked a little leaner in this fight.
Yeah, I love the heavyweight prospect fighting their way into shape thing.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite things. The next guy we're going to talk about, Curtis Blades, same deal. Blades was a little soft when he got into the UFC, and now he's pretty lean, a little ripped, getting up there.
Yeah.
And I think Tuivasa is never going to be as ripped as Curtis Blades is right now. No. I don't think. I feel comfortable saying that.
It comes from Mark Hunt stock.
He's probably going to get trimmer.
Man. He's already gotten trimmer. He comes from Mark Hunt stock, so I'm not worried if he's got a little bit of a belly. If he's got a little,
I'm not worried if he's got a lot of a belly. Just less.
No, frankly, I'm not worried at all. And nor would I ever criticize him for it, because I saw that left hook and I'm a little scared of it. But
that's a real nice left hook.
It really is. It's tight. It's precise. It comes off the right hand immediately. He's got a future. But let's talk about a guy who seems to be in the midst of realizing his future. Curtis Blades. We have not seen Francis Ngannou since the fight with Stipe Miocic, so we have no idea how he is going to be able to change his style mentally. If in a sense he has been figured out, which it's laughable, the idea that every heavyweight or even any other heavyweight can fight the way Stipe Miocic does. there is a certain thing here where, like, I was saying this the week before last with Mads Burnell and who was the guy who was fighting? Arnold Allen. Mm-hmm. Where it was like, oh, Allen's like the guy now. He's there, and he is like, that's why he's a prospect. Because he's like a top fighter who just hasn't got the resume together yet. But Mads Burnell looks like he might have the potential to surpass that. I'm kind of starting to feel that way with Curtis Blaydes. Like, he is building a style here that really, really stands out, especially in the heavyweight division, that like, you're not going to fight anybody else that is going to effectively prepare you for what Curtis Blaydes is going to do to you. And he may end up being the more complete and better fighter in the end than Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, there are exactly two guys at heavyweight who can do the kinds of things that Curtis Blaydes can do. One of them is Curtis Blaydes, and the other is Stipe Miocic.
Yeah,
those are the only two guys who have full wrestling skill sets, are dangerous from top position, and also can strike pretty well. Like Miocic, it's easy to forget now, but like, he was not the world's most devastating striker really up until the beginning of his title run. He was mostly a wrestler right up until the time when he won the title. He has only really developed into that vicious and dangerous a striker. Actually, I guess the Arlovsky knockout was the first one where you were really like, okay, what he showed there was really, really, really sharp.
Yeah. Or the Maldonado one, but we could believe that it was
Fabio Maldonado, man. Like, you can't. Yeah. I mean, a
give
guy
some
that he
credit
outweighed by probably 40 pounds too.
Give some credit to the man for knocking out the coolest bus driver of all time, but
weirdest bus driver of all time. But at any rate, I don't want to harp too much on that. But it's just like Blaydes has full and complete skill sets. He's becoming a better striker.
Yeah.
If you continue to give Blaydes time to develop in the gym, he's going to be a legit, can win fights on the feet kind of striker without ever touching his wrestling. Like, I would probably take, in a pure striking matchup at this point, I might take him over a guy like Fabricio Verdum.
Yeah, and I feel confident saying that he is even more durable than Miocic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this isn't a thing you want to find out about too much early in a guy's career, but really, like, Blaydes has been taking one nasty shot per fight for the last two. It's not too bad. He's not like he's getting lit up. The man took an Overeem knee on the chin. Like that, I have to emphasize that. He went for a shot, ate a flush Overeem knee on the chin, knees buckled a bit, finished the takedown.
Yep.
Like, he is insanely durable. And that's, of course, notwithstanding the incredible right hand that he took flush on the chin from Mark Hunt before quickly getting a takedown after that as well. He is ridiculously durable. And unlike Miocic, Blaydes, who has like a lot of the same skills and who has this remarkable wrestling game by heavyweight standards, is like the super heavyweight size. Miocic succeeds a lot because he is the smaller type of heavyweight. He's like a 230-pound-ish guy, 240-pound. He's a little bigger, I guess, than like the likes of Cain Velasquez, but he's like the smaller, quicker, more agile heavyweight with better stamina. And Blaydes seems to have tremendous stamina while being like 260-something pounds. And that, I don't know. I think Blaydes is going places, man. All of that being said, I think what you were saying about Overeem being just about done is probably right.
Yeah.
He didn't really have any answers other than like he landed a couple shots, but he didn't have the approach. He didn't seem to have any like path to victory in mind for this fight. And the wrestling wasn't really there either. So,
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty ugly performance from Overeem. But with that said, Blaydes looked outstanding.
Yeah.
Blaydes is going to be the guy. He's won 4 in a row. I guess, who do you give him next? I suppose that's the real question here.
He asked for a title shot. It's kind of hard to deny him that, I think. It might be too soon, but like, he asked for it. And honestly, like right now, I would like to see Curtis Blaydes versus Stipe Miocic. That sounds very intriguing. I want to see the two best heavyweight wrestlers try to take each other down. That sounds pretty awesome.
I think him versus either Cormier or Miocic, depending on who wins that fight, I would watch that. Otherwise, I would say I would watch him fight Alexander Volkov. I think that'd be cool as hell.
Yeah, why the hell not? That sounds pretty interesting. Although he would take Volkov down a lot. So
yeah, I think Blades would just murder Volkov, but that's but I'm a Curtis Blades fan. So
same.
Okay, so really quick, let's do these last couple of fights.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk about Gedalia Esparza. I don't actually have that much to say about that, so just go.
Okay, I would just quickly say there's only a couple things I wanted to point out here. I like that Claudia Gadelha is still improving her game. I like that her boxing is coming along. For the first few minutes of this fight, as is pretty much always the case, Gadelha always has her best moments in the first few minutes of the fight. Her positioning was really, really solid. I loved the way that there were a couple times Esparza would throw these big winging shots, and Gadelha knew she was not at the right angle for them to land. She kept her eyes on the punches as they were coming in, saw they were going to miss, and did not react. I always like to see that when a fighter doesn't have to react, and so they don't. They're not oversensitive about protecting their range or whatever. I also wanted to say that Carlos Esparza is badass and deserves a lot more credit. If you are the kind of fighter who will fade late, Carla Esparza will give you problems. And she, too, is continuing to improve. But there was one thing, for whatever reason, this stuck out to me in this fight. Gadelha, she's gonna be a fighter who fades late. And she's also gonna be a fighter who, she's gonna fade late because she gets so worked up in her fights. I think Gadelha is a very emotional fighter. And I don't mean that to be disparaging. It certainly has nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman. There are male fighters who I would consider emotional fighters as well, who get caught up in the moment of what's happening and lose focus. And I think that is the case with Gadelha. I want to say, because her boxing was looking good, I think it was Tommy Gibbons? God, I might be wrong on that name, but I think that's her new boxing coach. And he was giving her advice in the corner, and Jimmy Smith, not trying to call Jimmy out here, but he critiqued the fact that her corner told her she'd banked the first 2 rounds because it was really close up to that point, and she might have lost the first because she got dropped. So I want to say, I think I took it as a good sign that her coach did that, because I think she's with the team now because she's tried to personalize this team around herself rather than just being like a Novu Uniao hanger-on. She's got a team that understands how she works as a fighter. And I think when you have an emotional fighter like Gadelha, you don't want to put any more pressure on her than she's already putting on herself. It's a very fine line she's walking to manage her energy in the midst of a wild back-and-forth fight, especially against a fighter like Esparza, who will push and grind like nobody's business if you let her. So, I don't know. I like the direction that Gadelha's career is headed in. She's still having these super tight fights all the time where it's like you never quite feel like you always have that second fight with Ioane and Jacek in your mind, and you're like, man, she's never going to win a 5-rounder because she fades, but she may still end up getting there. She is developing a more measured style, and she has a team that seems to understand how to manage her as a fighter. So I liked that. Finally, Mirsad Bektic, Pat. Mirsad Bektic and Ricardo Lamas. We are the ultimate cheerleaders for Mirsad Bektic. We've been following him very closely almost since he debuted in the UFC. You most specifically, because you had him as one of your all-time top prospects. He fought Ricardo Lamas on this card, won a split decision. What did you make of it?
I'm kind of off the hype train.
Are you?
Yeah. I think he is incredibly physically gifted still. I think he has a lot of skills that we're only going to see the true depth of kind of later on in advancing years. But I think he is incredibly tense when he gets in the cage.
Yes. And
that makes him way worse than he actually is.
I think you're right. It was notable that the commentators in this fight mentioned that Bektic, during a pre-fight interview, had said, I'm more relaxed when I fight now than I ever have been. Maybe that's the case. But we did mention it a little bit last week, I think. Maybe on our bonus episode, actually. But Mirsad Bektic has like that Jose Aldo tenseness, but doesn't really have the depth of skill that allows Jose Aldo to use that like that coiled spring style of fighting. And so the thing that really struck me in this fight is that there was just a lot of space where it didn't seem like Bektic was doing anything. And that's like, that happens in fights where nothing is happening, quote unquote. But as you mentioned earlier with Yoel Romero, like, you can be getting things done while you're not hitting the other guy or taking him down or whatever. And that is something that I think maybe because of that tension, Bektic doesn't really grasp. That he can be, you know what I mean? I think he needs to show more while giving less. Needs, and more of what he gives should maybe be like counters, but I don't know that he's relaxed enough to do that.
Yeah. He seems to fade late. And I think the reason he fades late is not because he's explosive, it's because he's tense.
Yeah.
I love Firas Zahabi as a coach. I think that Bektic is probably going to get more done with Zahabi as a coach than he would have at ATT. I think he had kind of plumbed the depths of what he could get out of ATT. But I really think he needs to go to New Mexico, not necessarily for a fight camp, but just go and have like a half a dozen conversations with Greg Jackson. And just let the calming energy work through him.
Just sign up for a lecture series with Greg Jackson. You don't even have to train under him. Just buy his audiobook.
Go to New Mexico, do some cardio with Greg Jackson, go run up a fucking mountain, and let him talk to you about calmness and finding your center and shit. And I think it would do wonders for Bektic, because the problem is not the things that Bektic knows how to do. He knows how to throw. He knows how to throw punches. He knows how to throw kicks. He knows what to do in the clinch. He knows how to wrestle. He knows what to do from top position. The guy has the skills. The guy he's not dumb in a fight. He has a pretty good sense of what he is supposed to be doing when. The problem is that he is so coiled that he spends twice as much energy as the explosive movements that he's doing actually take.
Yeah.
Like, and then when he's not doing them, he's thinking about them and psyching himself out and fucking with his breathing patterns and just like getting all up in his head about what he's going to do next. And it's noticeable.
Yeah.
Like,
he's not just like existing and experiencing he's
there's no flow. He has no flow.
No flow
in a fight.
Yeah. You are absolutely right. He doesn't touch. He doesn't like really faint. He can't, it's like he can't really feel what's happening in the fight in the way that, like, you can't read Braille if you're just smashing your hand on the page or pushing down really hard. You need to let your finger glide over the bumps. You need to have feel. You need to chill a little bit. Can you think of any examples, just before we wrap up here, because this is going to be a long episode, but I think it's worth it. Can you think of any examples of fighters who were notably really tense, who then seemed to kind of solve that issue, who seemed to settle down?
Not fully solved, but I think Edson Barboza was really tense.
One. Yeah.
And I think I think Mark Henry worked a lot with him on his eyes, on seeing things coming and feeling confident watching things come. So he's probably the example that comes to mind best. I think Anthony Johnson never solved that particular issue. I think maybe sometimes when Johnson felt like he was really in control, like remember when he was pressuring Phil Davis and walking him down? Yeah. But it was he had to be in the right space mentally, and you could really knock him out of it. Yeah, exactly the right frame of mind. I think I'm trying to think of another couple of examples here. I think Fabricio Verdum was really tense on the feet for like a 3-fight stretch. Yeah, that's a good one. I think Barboza is a very good shout, and I think I latching onto that one because what I wanted to say is, and this isn't just because I love boxing. Listeners of the show know that I love boxing, and when it comes to MMA, my advice or my analysis so often can be summed up as, you should be better at boxing. But I really think that there's something to the way that boxing is taught as a martial art. And you could maybe get this from jiu-jitsu as well. But the thing is with jiu-jitsu, you can really power your way through more effectively than you can in boxing, I think. Maybe that's completely untrue. But when you're a fighter like Mirsad Bektic, you have that kind of strength and the matches are only 9 minutes long or whatever. You can probably push as hard as you want and still have enough energy to finish it and do all the techniques you want to do, especially when you are a wrestler as he is. Boxing, there's like a great understanding of feel is super important in boxing. Learning how to develop feel through the eyes. Learning how to develop a sense of feel where you don't have to be touching the opponent. You don't have to be locked in combat with them.
you learn to just kind of read an opponent, learn to stand in front of somebody and not be worried about what's going to hit you. Learning to be so relaxed that you know you'll have the right response in your back pocket no matter what they try to do. And that you'll have the right response after that, and then after that to the follow-ups without really having to think about them because you can feel the exchange. That's something that, like, I'm thinking about this because of how successful Robert Whittaker has been by learning to seriously wrestle. Not wrestling for MMA, but learning to wrestle. And I do think more fighters could benefit from doing that. And I don't know, I have this feeling like Mirsad Bektic might solve a lot of his problems if, like Joe Duffy, he took a little time off to box and went with like a trainer who really understood where he was coming from and who would do drills with him where he's learning his defense, where he really, really focuses on striking defense, learning to be relaxed in front of someone who's trying to hit you. Because once you're relaxed with your defense, it's much, much easier, I think, to be relaxed with your counters. If you're like Conor McGregor with your defense, where everything is like this spring-coiled, instantaneous response, where you have these like sets of moves that you go to, you can still gas yourself out. But if you're capable of just defending, and you can then decide when to counter and when not to counter, if you can put 3 or 4 defensive moves together, that's the kind of thing only boxing will teach you. And when you can do that, that's when you're a calm fighter. You know, I don't know. I feel like I would like to see Bektic just go work with some boxers for a little bit and chill the fuck out. But I'm not ready to be off the hype train yet, Pat. I mean, in fairness, you know, Ricardo Lamas is like one of the very best in the world, and Bektic did beat him. But yeah, it wasn't really as transcendent as you kind of want it to be from a guy with his talent, was it?
Yeah, I think it shows you how talented that he is, that he, even while looking incredibly tense, he still won a pretty clear, clean decision. Like, I don't understand the split thing. Like, he pretty obviously won 2 rounds, and there's a case for him to win the third, too. Like, if even in a fight like that where he was clearly not showing everything that he's capable of, he pretty handily won a decision over one of the 5 or 8 best featherweights on the planet. Yeah. So that shows you how unbelievably talented he is. So these critiques of him are not like, oh, he's a trash fighter. It's just like, he's capable of so fucking much. Yeah. He is one of the most insanely gifted fighters I've ever seen, and I would love to see him live up to that. Yeah. Fulfill his talent.
A Romero-esque kind of talent. And so it's unfair to him maybe, but everything kind of feels a little disappointing. You're like, man, how good could Mirsad Bektic be? So take my very credible advice, Mirsad, and go learn to box. Go hang out with, I don't know, who's a good chill boxing trainer? I don't know. Jose Aldo seems to be having a fun time with Mikey Garcia and who's the trainer? Marcos Maidana's trainer.
I don't know.
I'm blanking on his name. Come on.
Not Robert Garcia.
Yeah, Robert Garcia. Yeah. Oh. You know, maybe that'll be good. I don't know. Somebody like, you know, I watched Mikey Garcia sparring with Jose Aldo, and like, he was letting him work. He was taking a little easy on him. And then like Aldo started to hit him hard and he started to hit him back. And it was like, yeah, this is the kind of training that's really, really good if you're just like freaking the fuck out internally when you're in the cage, which it does feel like Bektic kind of is. So I don't know. Do something, Mirsad. Please transcend as we want you to. Anyway, that's it for us. What do you have coming out this week, Pat?
I have an interview on Tides of History with my good friend, Dr. Keith Plymers, talking about rebellions and revolts, kind of popular politics in early modern Europe. Should be really interesting. Keith is a lovely person, one of my favorite folks on the entire planet, and chatting with him is always a pleasure. So I think that'll be really enjoyable.
Nice. And I saw you were posting about recording an upcoming episode about the world after the Black Death.
Yeah, so I have 2 episodes on the Black Death coming out this month. I have one about the Black Death itself coming out next week, and then the week after that, I have one about the world after the Black Death. So what happens when you lose 50 or 60% of the population over the course of a year or 2?
Yeah.
Which is deeply fucking terrifying.
Hey, if you say bless you every time somebody sneezes, folks, then it's probably because of this. So that sounds really interesting. Incredibly morbid, but very interesting. As for me, I don't know what the hell I have coming out this week. Honestly, why did I even ask you, Pat? Normally I try to avoid it when I'm ashamed of the fact that I don't have anything to do. But there will probably be something. A post-UFC 225 thing? I don't know. Maybe. But we will be doing an episode of the MMA Depressed Us this week. Zane Simon, Phil McKenzie, and I. So I encourage you to check that out. If you've never watched it, we or listened to it, we pick 3 awful fights from the back catalog on Fight Pass, and then we watch them. And we basically do, Mystery Sweet Science Theater 3000 and talk shit about the fights, and often get very distracted because sometimes bad fights are just bad and uninteresting. But it's always a good time where we just try to make each other laugh while punishing ourselves with bad MMA. So check that out on Thursday. And otherwise, thank you all for listening very, very much. We hope you enjoyed UFC 225 as much as we did. Whittaker-Romero was everything it could have been and more. It was really an incredible, incredible fight. And the fact that the rest of this card had anything interesting to offer was all just icing under the cake, I guess. But thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to check us out on social media. You got questions, concerns, you want to hit more updates on things like Tides of History or me when I occasionally post an article or video, then you can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter.com. And you can find me on the same site at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. You can find us both on Facebook as well. I'll let you figure out how to do that rather than reading the address. And, check us out on Patreon. Tell your friends, all that stuff. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. And it was a little long, but this has been Heavy Hands.